So if you can't understand the accent, just ask George or Nicole. Maybe Nicole probably better articulate even better. We're from the south, but you have to go way, way south until you get New Zealand. So New Zealand is where we're from. Background in agriculture. New Zealand is one big ranch. It's 40 million sheep, 10 million cattle, and a couple of people. Plus some orcs and wizards, and if you've seen Lord of the Rings. Anyone not seen Lord? You don't need to go there, just watch the movie. So 2008, God spoke to us to leave everything and go to a new country, and that landed us in Redding, California, not knowing what we were doing. And through that course of time, I did the School of Ministry there, and then we came on staff, and we got to start a ministry, a business called Heaven in Business, which is Matthew 6. Jesus teaches us how to pray. He said, pray like this: Our Father,
Lord in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
That's good. We can pause there. You go back. What's the point? Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But go back before that. It says, our Father, our source of supply. My source, we sang it. He's our very breath. This breath is yours. And when we position like that and recognize my Father, my source of supply, my source of favor and increase, and all that I am is in him, hallowed be your name. That means I am aware of you. I acknowledge you. You're closer than my skin and nearer than the air that I breathe. And as I do that, then I say from that place, let your kingdom come. In my work, in my education, in my family, in my city, in my nation, it's not passive, but is intentionally advancing. And so what we got to do was to say, what does that look like in our workplace, in our city? And that became, as a whole story, became Heaven in Business. And then the Lord spoke to us and said, leave everything and go to the East Coast, which is another whole story. But here's a little heads up. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's what our man, you wonder what your purpose in life is? Kingdom come. And then whatever you're doing, whether you're working, sleeping, janitor, CEO, president, doesn't matter what it is, let his kingdom come. Okay, you ready? Okay, take your seatbelts off. It's way more fun for the ride this morning. And here we go.
Thanks, Mike. Well, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to, and feel privileged to share the word with you this morning. So thank you, Pastor George, Senior Pastor George. We've been giving him a hard time. This is the first Sunday where he's Senior Pastor George. Whoop, whoop. A new season. Very exciting. I want to talk to you today. Some of you I know are note takers. I want to encourage you, if you are a note taker, here's what you should take notes on. You should not take notes on what I say. You should take notes on what the Lord is speaking to you. Because you can write down everything I say and walk away not changed, and that's not the goal here. The goal here is that you come and you hear the word of the Lord and you leave transformed. And you only really leave transformed if you take note of what the Lord is speaking to you. So don't try and capture the words, but try and capture the spirit of what the Lord is speaking to you today. I have a strong belief that the spirit of revelation is in the house today. See, I have a friend called Wendy Backlund, she heard this, I think, originally from Bill Johnson, that if the Spirit of God is in the house and somebody says peanut butter, Americans are into peanut butter much more than New Zealanders, just FYI, that if I say peanut butter, but the Spirit of the Lord is on those words, that peanut butter can go out and you'll still get revelation. That has nothing to do with how articulate I am. It has everything to do with the fact that the Spirit of the Lord is in the house and that He's bringing revelation. But if you do like to take notes, here's an insight into where we're going today. The title, I would say, is From Monument to Memorial Stone to Momentum. See, I think we have learned in the church to make monuments that were supposed to be memorial stones, that were supposed to propel us into our future, into our destiny. And so this morning I'm going to tell you some stories from the Bible and some stories from our life. And you should see that the fingerprints of the Lord are on this, and anything that you capture is supposed to be like a signpost to who he is. And once you know more about who he is, then you live from that place of that revelation of who he is. It's not just what he's done, it's actually who he is. And who he is to you is a really big deal because you live out of that revelation, right? Out of that place, what you really believe, what you know to be true. A couple of months ago, maybe it was last month, we were in Harrisburg and we were with Pastor Chandi from the Life Centre there. If you have a chance to go there, if you're in that area on a Sunday, then you should go there. And if you're here, come here. But he made this statement, he pulled out this verse that we're really familiar with. It's Revelations 1:8. It actually says this same thing in multiple places in Revelation. And we hear it often spoken as the God who was and is to come. But the verse actually says the God who is and was and is to come. See, we like it was, is, and is to come because we think linear, in a line. Linearly, that's a really hard word to say. In a line. But God says, I'm the God who is today. And that's impacted by the God who was, who you experienced him to be in your past. And that's meant to propel you and speak to your future. We can't live in the God of yesterday. I have, and we have as a family, like literally I could sit and spend hours telling you the miracles he's done on our behalf. But if I stay telling you the stories from a long time ago, they still have power, they still have life on them. But if I live from that place, and I don't let that speak to the God who is today, then I've missed it. We had, people use different words, but when I was, I guess, in my 20s, there was a renewal movement that came through our church, and we had these crazy meetings. And there was a group of girls that were a little bit younger than me. They were much cooler than I was. They were the hip girls. And when in these meetings they got hit, and you could watch them with open eyes, they were seeing angels. Like, that's pretty cool. Anybody want to see angels with their natural eyes? Like, I want to see that. And they had these amazing encounters. A few months later, what was made obvious to everyone is one of them was pregnant, 19-year-old, not married. And it was, what came out is that the whole group of them had been going to nightclubs, getting drunk, sleeping around. That's what not to do. See, they had this amazing experience with the Lord. But they didn't take that, and who did I see that who God was in that moment, and take that into the rest of life? Those encounters they had were to show them who God was. And it was supposed to, when we see him and behold him face to face, we're transformed from glory to glory. It's not so we feel good, it's so we're transformed to be like him, and then we take that transformation and we carry it with us in our everyday lives. And so often in the church we've focused on, well, I had this great encounter. Okay, but how did it change you? Who did you find he was in that moment? So I want to tell you some stories from the Bible. The first one probably to think about is Joshua 4. This is where the idea of memorial stones comes from. The Israelites have come through and they're about to cross into the promised land, and they get marching orders, how they're going to do that. And part of the orders from God is when you get over there, get a guy from each tribe to grab a big stone, and we're going to make a memorial. We're going to make those stones into something that reminds you what I did to get you into the promised land. And twice in that chapter, it talks about why that is. The first time it talks about it, it says, so the people will know what I did for you as a people. When they see that pile of stones, whatever configuration it was big enough and different enough that it caught people's eyes. When they walked past, they went, what on earth is that? Oh, that's what the Israelites made when God stopped the Jordan River so they could walk through. The second time he talks about it, he says, that's so when your kids ask you about it, you say, hey kids, remember? That's what the Lord did for us. He is the God that makes a way. Now, if you live in the neighborhood with anything that's a reminder of anything, maybe it's a statue, maybe it's a plaque, the first time you walk past it, you look and you say, wow, that's cool, that reminds me. But pretty soon when you're walking past it, you don't remember anymore. That's when it becomes a monument. See, the memorial stones, the Israelites forgot who they were. If you read the stories of the Israelites that are a picture of us, you see that they took it and they saw it at first and they went, oh yeah, God was cool, he helped us, yay. But pretty soon they were like, oh God, you're not with us, boo. Come on now. I had a conversation with our 20-year-old. She is in college. She's just finished her junior year. And God has provided for her in such a way that she had money in her bank account. And it's not because we paid for school for her. It's because the Lord has blessed her financially and she has worked hard. And she had money in the bank account and she needed to buy a car because she's in Washington, D.C. for an internship. And she calls me and she's nervous about spending this big chunk of money for the first time and worrying about how will I pay for college next year. She calls me, Mom, and she's just processing and I'm just listening pretty much. I'm kind of nervous and I need this car, but what if it doesn't work and da-da-da-da. And then partway in she stops herself and she says, but wait a minute. I actually have no right to be saying this, do I? I actually have no right to be nervous because I actually have seen the faithfulness of the Lord in finances so much. I have no right to be nervous anymore. She goes, okay, all right, we'll see you then. And I got off the phone and went, yes. She got it. See, the God that was for Emily just became the God who is. And it means that when she steps into her next year for college and she hasn't got what she had in the bank, she still knows that the Lord is faithful. And her past memorial stones speaks to her today to give her momentum into her tomorrow. So let's talk about some of the New Testament ones. John 11:15 in the New Passion Translation. It's the story of when Lazarus is dying, and remember, the word comes to Jesus, Lazarus is dying, and his sisters know that Jesus is capable of healing him, and they call for him to come quick before he dies. And Jesus waits. Okay, and Lazarus dies, and then he turns up and everybody's mourning. And then the Lord says this, Jesus says this, actually, I'm glad I wasn't there. Now think about it, if it's you and your loved one has died, you've asked Jesus to come and heal them, and then he didn't, and then your loved one dies, and then when Jesus turns up, he says, actually, I'm glad I wasn't there. It's kind of offensive, right? Come on, you're acting very, proper. I'd be mad. I'd be ticked if Jesus did that to me. I'd be ticked. You had the power to heal my loved one, and you're glad. Not only did you not turn up, but you're glad you didn't turn up. I want to know why you're glad. So you better pay attention to what he says next. And what he says next is, because now you have another opportunity to see who I am. Why? So that you'll learn to trust me. See, every time you interact with the Lord, it's another opportunity for you to see who he is, so that you may learn to trust him. See, if Jesus turned up before Lazarus died, all the disciples would have known as, oh yeah, he's Jesus that heals. We already know he's Jesus that heals. But now when we turn up and there's a dead body in the tomb and he's been there for 4 days, and Jesus calls Lazarus out and Lazarus was resurrected, now I get it. You are resurrection, Jesus. That's who you are. See, I think Jesus he knew the future of the disciples, and he knew that they needed to know he was resurrection power. For a start, when he died himself, they're like, remember the last time somebody was in a tomb for a while? It actually worked out okay. So when Jesus died on the cross and they're looking at his tomb, in the back of their mind, they should have been thinking, but Jesus is resurrection. Who is he to you? Who was he to you? That should speak to who is he to you. That should propel you into who he will be for you. Want another one, another story? Mark 8. And here, I'm going to set the scene for you. Jesus has just fed 4,000 people. So remember, they get there and the disciples come and they say, hey, there's 4,000 men. So most of them have their wives. Let's assume there's half of them are married. We're talking 6,000 people, and some of them have got kids. We're talking about 8,000 people, and there's hardly any food. And Jesus multiplies it, and the disciples give it out. So they're watching. I want to see that movie when I'm in heaven. What did that look like? But they're watching, and they're not only watching, they're grabbing the food. And I don't know if there was fish that time. I think there was. And they're passing it out. And then at some point, the disciples got hungry themselves, and now everybody's fed, and we get to eat too. So they're eating the bread. And then they're picking up the leftovers, basketfuls of leftovers. Okay, so this is what's just happened. Now they get in the boat, and they take off with Jesus. It says that immediately they went there, and then immediately they went somewhere else. So I'm thinking at least within the next 24 hours, they're in the boat with Jesus, and they get hungry again, and they suddenly realize, who brought the bread? Who? Oh no. And it says in Mark 8, is it? Yes, Mark 8, that they barely had one loaf between them. So somebody had something stuffed in their back pocket, and they're like, oh, we're going to be hungry. What? So you watch Jesus divide food and give it to 4,000 men and their women and kids. You tasted the food, you picked up the leftovers, and now you're really worried about you've only got a loaf to feed 20 of you? See, what they saw, what they experienced with the feeding of the 4,000 was supposed to speak to what they would experience that next day. It was supposed to lead them into God is provision. So when I find myself in a boat with one loaf of bread for this many people, oh, it's okay, because I already experienced the God who multiplies, the God who makes it enough, the God who will give me and feed me. And so Jesus gets a little bit frustrated and he says, guys, don't you remember the feeding of the 4,000? Don't you remember the feeding of the 5,000 before? When there was all 12 baskets left over. Don't you remember? And he says, where of their discussion? So they're all like, oh, what's going to happen? And Jesus says, why are you talking? You have no bread. You still don't understand. Your heart's hardened. Are your eyes so blind? Are your ears so deaf? Is your heart so hardened that you didn't get it? That the God that was feeding the 4,000 is still the God that is. And he will be the God of your tomorrow. So when you find yourself on the road and you're hungry again, that feeding of the 4,000 speaks to that. It propels you, and it propels you into a trust relationship where you have no fear of lack. My iPad won't move. There we go. I want to ask you today, who has he been for you? I was standing in the worship and I don't know why this memory, maybe because I had a chat with Summer, we were talking on Friday night about how for them in this season and for us and kind of in this season and certainly other seasons, we live in our miracle. We live in the house that the Lord provided. So we had a house in Reading that literally, miracle after miracle, I could tell you, and it was a house far, far beyond what we could naturally afford. It was 6,000 square feet. There's 6 of us, so, you know, it's huge even for that many of us. It's where we hung out when we got shut in from COVID. Beautiful, 3 acres. And when you first move in and you know the Lord has provided, it's a memorial stone. Every day it's like, look at the goodness of God. But even with that miracle story, it's still easy to get to the place where it's kind of just a monument to what he did. And the thing that keeps it alive as a memorial stone and propels me into the future is the gratefulness in my heart. Lord, look what you have done. Look how good you are. And we had to remind ourselves, we are literally living in the Lord's provision. In his goodness, not just his just enough goodness. In his miraculous, extravagant, over the top, crazy goodness. 6 weeks after we moved into that house, a wildfire came through. And we had smoke this week, right? Our household was a little traumatized, honestly. Just a little. Because we were evacuated with police at the gate. We saw the fire cloud coming, like the cloud of smoke that says it's burning hard, and it's burning our direction. And we evacuated. We saw it was about, I think, 300,000 acres that were eventually burned in our town, our area. We evacuated to Andy's office. When we left there, because we didn't think that was safe to sleep there, we saw the whole hill on fire. When we got back, we had, I think, 3 or 4 days when we didn't know if our dream house was actually still standing. We knew that homes in that area had burned to the ground. We had many, many, many friends who lost their homes. A week later, we went back and everything was black. I mean, black. All the ground. Trees burned, homes burned, and our house miraculously was saved. by firemen. You can say it was angels, but we saw the fire, the mark, the imprint of the fire hose where it was lying on grass so the grass underneath didn't get burned. We saw the deep marks of where it parked on our front lawn so they could fight the flames and save our house. See, we know the God of protection. And we walked with friends who didn't experience the God of protection, but who experienced the God of comfort in the midst of tremendous loss. See, maybe you haven't had a wildfire come through and burn all your property, come within a foot of the gas tank. But you can borrow my testimony. I want to tell you, I know that I know He was the God of protection. He is today the God of protection, and He will be my God of protection. And if I need Him to be my God of comfort, I can look to my friends who experienced Him to be that and know that He will be that for me. The other thing I was reminded of is that I love about that experience. It was not a fun experience. We were actually stayed out of our house for 3 months because the smoke damage was... Andy and one of our children would get wheezy every time we walked in the house, so we couldn't live there for 3 months. Remember, we've experienced this beautiful house for 6 weeks. Now we're out. And when we come home, the whole back of our house that looked out over beautiful treed hills. It's not as beautiful as here in all honesty. It's California, it's dry. But when you looked out, now there's nothing but burned trees, like skeletons of trees. At the front of our house, it didn't get touched. It's green. The back of our house, like right up into our lawn, the trees alongside our pool are burned. Our whole neighbourhood has been, the house across the road from us burned to the ground. The house next to them burned to the ground. Our neighbours on this side had damage. Neighbours on that side damage to their sheds. I want to give you a picture of what it looks like. Now I get a choice. I'm living in God's miracle. I know He's the God of protection. But the reality of life too is that destruction came really close. And every day I get to choose what I look at. It's a beautiful picture for us. It was when you live something out and you know it to a deeper level. I could have looked in that season, and that season lasted till we left. I mean, when we left, there's still, some stuff regrows, but there's still the carcasses of trees. There's still destruction. It doesn't go away in 4 or 5 years. But I can look and see, well, God, you're the God who didn't save. Because you didn't save those people's houses, and you didn't save the land, and you didn't do this, or I can look and say with the eyes, oh my gosh, this is who you are. And I walk every day, and I would walk. I had this loop that I'd walk with the dogs. And every day, as the land began to recover, I can choose. So within a few months, there's a few things popping up. By the time we finally get rain, now flowers start to poke up. And every day I can choose to look, and you have to look hard at first for the green and for the flowers and for the beauty. Or do I look at what is trying to tell me that God's not faithful? Who is he to you? Who was he to you that is supposed to speak to who he is in this moment and who he will be? This house, this church, has a tremendous history of the Lord coming. And I've talked to so many of you in the time that we've been here, and there was this time. But don't let it become a monument. Let it become a memorial stone to who he is and who he will be to us again. And don't look at the outward trappings of what it meant when he turned up, that lots of people were here and we had, the seats were full. And look to who it said he is. The God who is present with me. His breath on my face. Because if each of us remembered that kind of history and brought that kind of expectation when we came to church, I want to tell you our church services would be different. I'm looking for something I wrote. I'm not going to go there, but I also recently went to the Harrisburg Capitol building. Did you know there's a prophetic declaration on the dome there? Okay, that's my challenge to you. That's your homework. Look it up. There's a prophetic declaration. I have got it written down, but for the sake of time so you can get out and have lunch. There's a prophetic declaration on there that talks about that the very history, the foundation stone of Pennsylvania, of this nation, was birthed in a guy that had an encounter with the Lord and came and made a prophetic declaration that the glory of God can be shown in this state that will be an example to other states and to other nations. My goodness, people, we are living in what people have seen as a monument, and we're living, and we need to bring it into a memorial stone to propel us into the future and the destiny for this state and for these states and for the nations. The same with this church. See, I want to tell you when I come to church, I'm going to read something and I'm going to tell you how I come to church and challenge you, and then we're going to land this plane. Okay, this is what I said. See, I know that there was revival in this place. Here's what I wrote when I was preparing for this. It's easier for me to read it. I'm not waiting for revival to come. I'm going after revival. In fact, I have decided to be a walking revival. Why? Because my personal history with God tells me that's who he is. And the history of this church tells me that's who he is. And the history of this state tells me that's who he is. So I choose to live in that reality, and that choice propels me into the future. See, when I come to church, I don't come expecting Pastor George and Pastor Sherry and Pastor Mark to set an atmosphere for me. Because if they're having a bad day, that might not happen. They do a great job. See, I knew that Chris and Summer were going to be here, and I know that they open up the atmosphere and the presence of God turns up. But I didn't come this morning trusting them to do that for me. I came saying, it's my responsibility to turn my monuments into memorial stones to propel me into the future. I'm not waiting for you, church. You might be, I don't know, I feel hunger in this room. I feel hunger from you to experience revival again, but I'm not waiting for you. Sorry. See, I have decided that wherever I go, I will have revival inside of me. Andy went to Asbury. You know, when they had the renewal, revival, whatever you want to call it, whatever was happening at Asbury, Andy went. He was in the neighbourhood and he went. When he came home, I said, what was it like? He said there was repentance. And I went, in my mind, I went, check, that's happening in my prayer closet. And he said there was a sweet presence of the Lord. And I went, check, that's happening in my prayer closet. And whatever the other things he said, I went, well, that's happening for me when I meet with Jesus. I'm like, I'm having revival. Oh, this is great. I'm actually having revival. So when I come like that. See, I've decided I'm actually naturally not a demonstrative person. I kind of am, I guess, in some ways. But I'm not the wah person. I'm not. I'm just not. And that's okay. And Jesus absolutely loves that I'm not. But see, when I come to worship, you'll see me, if you happen to see me worshiping, you'll see me with my hands high because I'm intentionally going beyond what's comfortable. See, I have decided that I'm stepping in. And today there's an invitation for you to do that too. And it comes as you say, I have a history. If you're in this church today, then you have a history with the Lord. Maybe you don't have a big history that you can tell people about, but you're like, you are here, then you get to be grafted into this house. And you can take any one of these people out for a coffee, out for a lunch, and hear their history with God and go, I'm taking that. I see that you know God as the God who is this. And that means if he's that for you, he's that for me. Anyone you come. So when you come to church, when you go to your workplace, when you go home, when you're with your family, wherever you are, have that same, I invite you into that same decision today. That you will discover who he is, and as you gaze on his goodness, as you gaze on his faithfulness, that you would have no other response than to say, I will be revival. I will be hungry. I will take all that you have been in my past and I will see that that's who you are today, and I will be propelled into the future that you have for me.
Is this good? It's so good. I want to read this to you. Janine was referring to Revelation. Isn't this cool? There's a blessing just by reading the book of Revelation. This is one verse, Revelation 1 verse 4, second half. It says, grace and peace to you. Grace and peace to you. Grace and peace to you. You cannot do this in your own ability. What you can do is cultivate the memorial, what God did, who he was. And I bring that by remembering this is what God did. What's God been doing for you? This is what he did. So who is God to you today? And that's who he will be. How do I do that? Grace and peace to you. Grace and peace to you from the one who is and who always was and who is still to come. I think there's two things we're going to do this morning. Firstly, if you are here this morning and you don't know the God who is, you may have heard Bible stories about who God was. You might have heard good ones and bad ones, but you don't know him personally, the God who is. 2 Peter says that he is the chief cornerstone and we are living stones. But until he lights you up, there's deadness on the inside. He is the God who is, and he wants to be who he is to you. Is there anyone this morning and you say, I want to meet the God who is? You said, I've never done that before, and I want to invite the God who is to be my Lord and Savior, fully alive, my best friend. Give me a wave if that's you, because we're going to pray with you first. Anybody? Perhaps you're online. If you don't want to respond right now, I encourage you to, but if you don't, you can come up and see any of the pastors. They'll pray with you, or turn to the person beside you and say, man, I want to know the God who is. I want to know the God who is. Can you pray with me? Okay, secondly, there's people here and you recognize, some of who God was, it's still who God was. That was the slaves in Israel. Pharaoh said, what? Why would I be intimidated by you, God of slaves? Because who God is just became a was. God did this in the past. It was 400 years ago, but I don't know who God is. I don't know where he is today. I just have this sense that God's wanting to remind you who he is. How? Grace and peace to you. He's bringing that alive again. He's bringing alive the sense of the God who is. He is I am. He is with me. He's alive with me. He's been in the past. And if that wasn't just for me, that Revelation says this, that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb, what Jesus did, by the word of their testimony. There's a collective testimony in this place that I can tap into. And we do not love our lives unto death. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get everybody to stand. Chris and Summer are going to lead us again in worship. And if you're saying, I want fresh fire, I want this living stone to be living again, and I just want the Spirit of God to come upon me and cause everything that was, not to just be what was, but to be alive and well, then during the worship, I want you just to quickly come up the front, and the team's going to be here to pray, to lay hands on you and just agree that the Spirit of God touches you afresh. So Jesus, we just want to thank you. Thank you for this morning. Thank you that you are the God of I am, that you're with us, that you're not distant, you're not far off, but you're with us up close, personal right now, closer than my skin and nearer than the air I breathe. We're aware of you. You are our source. You're our strength. All of our life is in you. So we just stand before you right now. We bring all that we were, all that you were, all that we am, all that we are, and ever hope to be. And we lay it at your feet. And we say, Jesus, let grace and peace come upon us right now and cause it to come alive. Cause it to come alive. Just begin to lift your voice. Cause it to come alive. Lord, let your fire come upon us again. Cause us to come alive. Cause us come alive. Just you lift your hands in worship. God, ignite me again. Stir fresh passion and fresh fire in me where I've become limited by the things around me. Lord, stir again a fresh heart and a fresh fire for you. And if you want prayer for anything, fresh fire, fresh hope, fresh grace, make your way to the front. Pastor George, the team, they're going to be up the front here. But we're just going to keep to worship, and we just say, let the kingdom of God come.